Welcome everyone to the MMA Vivisection with me, Zane Simon, and my co-host Connor Rebush. We're here to talk about this week's UFC Belem card, which I still maintain is better than UFC on Fox 27 Cachoeira versus Brunson 2, at least on paper.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sold last week. I think you said something similar on the last Vivisection, but as it's come nearer, and after working myself into such a state of disappointment just thinking about that last card, I'm kind of convinced that this is, in fact, a substantially better card, especially considering the context that this is not intended to be a Fox card.
It's not intended to be a Fox card, and there are, like, Eryk Anders has something. A win here is big for him in a way that a win for Cachoeira or Brunson is not necessarily that big.
It means more at this point in Eryk Anders' career if he wins. Likewise for Machida, it means that he's not done. You know?
And for Shevchenko, I mean, she may not be the most thrilling fighter in the world at times, but she is the flyweight champion in waiting. So any win for her, any fight for her right now has meaning because of that.
Not the most exciting female fighter, but she may be the best female fighter. She's in that conversation. So
she is. Yeah, I mean, part of me wants to argue against that, but she came damn close to beating Amanda Nunes.
She's at least in the conversation. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's really like her, Nunes, and Cyborg right now, and then you have arguments about Joanna and Rose to make that depend a lot on their second fight, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we are going to dive into this card, get talking about it. Might keep a few of these brief, but honestly, I'm pretty interested in just about every fight on this card.
Yep, I'm into it.
Yep. So let's start at the bottom, and a women's strawweight bout, Maia Stevenson versus Polyana Viana.
Maia Stevenson, the biggest thing you have to know about her is that she has never beaten an opponent with a single win. That is at least according to Tapology, assuming that all of those, I mean, many of these are fighters that their records aren't listed aside from just what they were listed as on the night she fought them. They don't have record pages on Tapology, but that kind of confirms that they're not wins that really mean that much.
Winning fights in Gladiator Challenge, even if those people have fought, I mean, you are literally talking about people who are living at the very edges of the fight game.
They have fought. That's the problem, is that several of her fights are against an opponent with 5 fights and not a single win.
Yeah.
0-5, 0-3, 0-4. She's not fighting debutantes.
But I mean, they could have been like, those people could have fought 20 times, but you're talking about people who get called in on the week for a smoker fight and haven't been training at all, but need $50. And those are the people that end up being professional opponents in Gladiator Challenge.
Yeah. And other than beating up soccer moms, it's kind of hard to say what Maia Stevenson's really good at. She's a striker by nature, I think. She looks a little tentative, though, whenever she goes in there against a really confident striker. She doesn't seem comfortable leading. And the contrast between her, she had a fight with Kerry Melendez. I don't know why that happened, but a kickboxing bout. And like the contrast in just confidence in throwing strikes and covering distance between them was really, really jarring. To her credit, she didn't get knocked out by Melendez, so that's something. But it does look like Polyana Viana is a much more comfortable and willing fighter. She's kind of sloppy. I wouldn't even say kind of. She's quite sloppy with her technique. Her punches tend to go very wide almost all the time. Her chin floats up in the air, and she's not super confident leading. She really prefers to counter like a lot of novice strikers do, but she seems to pack a decent punch. She throws in combination. She's got a decent-looking kicking game to back up the boxing, and from what little I've seen, she seems to be quite comfortable in the scrambles on the ground as well. So it just looks like Viana is the more natural fighter with the better tested record than Stevenson by far.
Viana has the kind of game that is like, it's made to eat up competition regionally.
Yes.
And it might struggle against good competition in the UFC, but that's not this. Like, Maia Stevenson is exactly the fighter that Polyana Viana's game is made to work against, because it's range kicks, front kicks, low kicks to keep fighters way outside and from getting a read on like jabbing or cross, leading with punches. And then it's a heavy counter game, just sort of you could almost say panicked, but at least a triggered counter game of like, if somebody actually does wade in, I'm just going to start throwing hooks, backing up, and make it hard on them to stay in the pocket.
Yeah.
And then it's, she backs herself into the clinch, where then she's really happy to pull guard, drop to the mat any way she can, and has a very good ground game. A really actually like competitive grappling, well-schooled jiu-jitsu game.
I noted that her celebration after one of her wins was jumping and hitting a flying armbar on her coach. So I saw that. I was like, she's probably more of a jiu-jitsu player than she is a striker.
Yeah. I think she's a legitimately good grappler. The things I've seen her doing on the ground against opponents, it's like, she's the kind of person who gets backed up and just jumps for a flying triangle. And it's like, that's not going to work at the highest levels, but it's exactly the kind of thing that beats somebody like Maia Stevenson, who was getting tagged in a one of her few actual real fights in King of the Cage, and rolled for a knee bar and then just got beasted for like 10 minutes by this Japanese fighter she was facing.
Yeah. There's not a ton of structure to Viana's game, but she is game.
Yeah.
And Maia Stevenson, like, if you want to see what it looks like when Viana fights a fighter who essentially has like half a dozen wins against otherwise winless opponents, she's already done that.
Yeah.
She's beaten fighters like that, and Stevenson's record consists of nothing but those meaningless wins. So,
yep. On that note, Viana is a heavy favorite, opened at -270, dropped down to -350, and is now at -389. And Stevenson opened at +190, jumped up to +263, and is now at +303. I don't like to see odds that wide for a couple of debuting raw strawweight fighters, but Stevenson's
it is clear that they're setting Viana up for a win. I mean,
yeah, it would be tough. It would be tough for me to see Viana losing this, unless Stevenson just somehow manages to catch her with a perfect punch.
Yeah.
Brings us to a flyweight bout: Deiveson Figueiredo versus Joseph Moraes. Dynamics of this one, honestly, I think they're pretty simple. Figueiredo, he trains with Iuri Alcantara. He's part of that Marajo fight team, and kind of just fights exactly like Iuri Alcantara, but at flyweight. The big, like, powerful winging hooks and strikes, and then big takedowns, and then good slick grappling and in transition work when he gets there. But it's all like these big, powerful moves. Probably benefits from being a flyweight and having a better gas tank and being a little more powerful than his opponents, whereas Alcantara has ended up being kind of a gassing prone, undersized bantamweight. Not even undersized.
Hard to say he's undersized. He's
just kind of short. He's got long limbs, but he's
not. He just doesn't seem to have. He doesn't seem to have the same kind of explosive power that Figueiredo does, or at least I think it's also that Alcantara is like 36, so he's probably lost a bit of that pop as well.
Oh, he definitely has. Moraes, he's I believe maybe instructor, even grappling instructor. I want to say at Team Alpha Male. And he's got some good, slick grappling work. He's got some power in his hands, some decent striking. He does not appear to have the athleticism of a flyweight. Guy he was fighting last time, Sanchez, was also not very athletic and pretty unstructured, and had a pretty easy time just putting Morales on his back early and beating him up until Morales got up and cracked him with a big right hand. We've seen Figueiredo be tough. We've seen him be stronger and bigger and faster than opponents. Like what he did to Jared Brooks makes me feel like he can have a lot of trouble, or not a lot of trouble, rather, controlling Morales. So I got to take Figueiredo here, mostly just off being the better athlete.
I'm going to augment one of your points, and I'm going to quibble with one.
Okay, go ahead.
Instead of saying he's a flyweight Iuri Alcantara, to me, I love my cross fighter comparisons. Figueiredo is the flyweight Yoel Romero. There is huge spaces between what he does.
Sure.
And he's big and powerful for the division, and I think he is prone to gassing. He also has a hard time making the weight. But he's still dangerous when he's tired. And B, he manages his energy by doing that Yoel Romero or that Tyron Woodley thing where he just doesn't do much. He keeps it to a few explosions per round. So
that's fair. He's not the amazing next level athlete that Yoel Romero is.
No, but the size that he has at flyweight does sometimes make it look that way, especially against Jared Brooks. Like his size was a big deal against such a small flyweight. It really helped him in that fight. The other thing is that I would. Like, I don't think Roberto Sanchez was beating up Joseph Morales on the ground. I'm very interested in his ground game. It doesn't surprise me to hear that he's like a grappling instructor because he has what I would describe as an extremely annoying guard. Yeah. He has like those BJ Penn legs where they're just constantly hooking something, crossing the body, getting a knee in there, creating.
This is what I would say is that Sanchez got him down, and while he may not have done a lot of damage from there, Morales' guard was like Morales still ended up getting stuffed and shut down until he could get back up. It was standing up that got Morales back in the fight. It was not being on his back.
Oh, sure, yeah, and you can definitely see like he is. It's not arguable that he's a little too willing to play off of his back. But for all of the guard playing he doesn't tend to take a lot of damage because his legs are so goddamn annoying. He had a 5-round fight shortly before getting into the UFC with I'm going to forget the guy's name, but he had a 5-round fight with like a
Rock, right? Mm-hmm. Sean Santella, that fight?
No.
I think
it was somebody else. It was in Gladiator Challenge or whatever. Okay. And it was an 8-1 opponent, I believe. And he spent a lot of time getting taken down and scrambling on the ground, but didn't take much damage because his guard is so annoying. And I'm kind of intrigued to see how that guard matches up with the top game of Figueiredo, because I think Figueiredo, even though he's not like a phenomenal wrestler, I think his athletic ability is going to allow him to get some of those takedowns, and he is quite aggressive and dangerous from top position. But Morales is really, really tricky with that guard, and so I'm kind of interested to see that. Overall, I do think that like Figueiredo probably has a slight edge just in being a much bigger guy who is going to pinpoint shots and really put everything into them. He's quite difficult to take down if Morales feels that he needs the shot. I mean, Brooks got Figueiredo down a few times, but Brooks is a very explosive takedown artist. And Morales' wrestling is kind of so-so. He's got some nice trips from the clinch. He can time a good reactive takedown, but he doesn't seem to have much drive behind it. I like a lot about Morales' game.
Yeah,
but
I like a lot of, I think he's a good grappler, and I think that he's got some, he's shown some power in his hands and a willingness to throw and be a powerful striker. It's just at flyweight, athleticism is kind of everything. Everything that makes a game work at flyweight is being athletic.
Yeah, and the thing with Morales is that because there's not a ton of nuance to his striking, even though he is like willing and comfortable countering, and he does so in combination, he puts the shots together fairly well. he does tend to rush himself into the clinch. And I think that is where he's going to have real problems with Figueiredo, who again is very big for the division, but is also just a good clinch fighter. He keeps a lot of angles. He keeps good head position. He lands hard knees and uppercuts. I think that Moraes is going to end up tying up with Figueiredo, but not being able to get him on his back. And that's going to be a bad situation for him. I think it'll be competitive. I don't think Moraes is out of it, but I do favor Figueiredo.
Figueiredo is the favorite, opened at -165, adjusted up to -147, and is currently up at down to -150. Moraes is at +125, adjusted up to +129, has moved up and down a bit, got as low as +123, and now is at +125. Not a ton of movement on that line, but for what little there is, it's going up and down. And I am interested, actually. Let me see. Moraes by submission is 760. Moraes by TKO KO is +520. Like, I get kind of the feeling that if he wins this fight, it's going to be by finish because he's got some power and because he's a very good grappler. And it could, like, if he can keep his, even if he, as the lesser athlete, if he can keep his cardio going late when Figueiredo starts to fade, then there's a chance he might pull something out late in the fight.
It's possible. I think he would have to push the pace more aggressively to do that, and I think he's going to struggle to make Figueiredo fight at his pace. Figueiredo's going to be able to tie him up and stall him out and space out those explosions. If he could make Figueiredo explode over and over and over early, I would bank on that more, but not sure about that.
Takes it to a bantamweight bout. Iuri Alcantara versus Joe Soto.
I just thinking back to your Alcantara's last fight. Remember that barn burner with Alejandro Perez? Oh boy, how have we not already watched that on the Depressed Us?
Yeah, maybe we should.
Truly an awful performance from both men. It's very difficult to understand, to have any inkling of where Iuri Alcantara is right now as a fighter. He got quickly destroyed by Brian Kelleher in the fight before that. And then before that, he was getting mostly destroyed by Luke Sanders before hitting a sort of miraculous knee bar and getting a comeback win in the second round. I guess now that I say all that in a row, it does kind of feel like we've had some strong evidence that Iuri Alcantara is not long for the upper echelon of the bantamweight division, that he's finally reaching the end of his extended prime, or even his.
Got beat up by Jimmy Rivera, had a quick submission win over Brad Pickett off his back, and then got a come from behind submission, and then lost his last two fights.
Yeah. So the things have not been going super smoothly for him lately. The thing is that I still think he's a much better athlete than Joe Soto. Alcantara's still got speed. He's still got power. He can still cover distance in very surprising ways. It also, like, that athletic ability also makes his wrestling better than I think it actually is, where he's clearly he gets put in positions where he's just looks way too easy to take down. But then occasionally you get these really nice sort of scrambly movements from him where he's cutting quick angles, switching his hips out unbelievably fast. And so even though I think Joe Soto, I trust Joe Soto more to just kind of do his thing, to go in there, put his shots together, work on the ground if he can. I don't know how he's going to force his game on Alcantara. You know what I mean? Like,
kind of. Are you picking Alcantara?
I don't know. Like, I don't know how Joe Soto is going to. He could walk Alcantara down and throw shots, but it might be one big counter from Alcantara. Soto is not super durable, and he's not super quick. He tends to be kind of hittable.
The question then becomes, when's the last time that Alcantara hit that one big counter?
I mean, he knocked Jimmy Rivera down, didn't he?
Yeah, I guess he did. So it would be 2016.
I think he still got it. the thing with Perez is that Perez just didn't come forward. Perez refused to engage in that fight. And I actually thought Alcantara won that fight against Perez just because he landed the more powerful shots. The question is if Soto does come forward, does that get enough additional volume out of Alcantara that he can make some big moments happen? Or does he just get kind of sucked into Joe Soto's fight? A lesser athlete with a more consistent game. I think I'm going to go with Alcantara, actually. Goddamn. No. This is a hard pick for me, man. I kind of hate this matchup because I don't know what it means. Or I'll just go with my first instinct. I'll take Alcantara. I think it's going to be very dicey, but I have a really hard time relying on Joe Soto, despite the fact that his game is much more reliable than Yuri Alcantara's. I just don't think he as an athlete is necessarily up to the level of the UFC's bantamweight division. So, oh man, no.
Yeah, I'm taking.
I don't know. I might switch.
Soto. That's all there is to it. Like
I think I might switch.
The fight he had with Perez. The thing is like Joe Soto is hurtable and hittable, but you kind of have to. It really has to be just the right shot that lands to put Joe Soto away. And if it's not that perfect shot, like even against Chris Beal, who was lighting him up early, he rallied back and turned the tide and like just,
that's Chris Beal. That is Chris Beal, like king of shooting himself in the foot.
I know. But my point is that Yuri Alcantara, the last time he actually turned, like he has what? 3, I guess he's got 4 knockouts since 2010 and 2
I don't think he
UFC.
needs to knock him out. I think he just needs to create the bigger moments to win the rounds.
But
look at this is a little bit of supporting evidence for me. Here are the names of the people that Joe Soto has been beating versus the names of the people he's been losing to. He's beaten Hani Yahya, a very unathletic grappling specialist.
Yep.
He beat Marco Beltran, a not particularly athletic, not particularly specialist in anything. And he beat Chris Beal, a very athletic buffoon who cannot fight correctly. And then, like, if you take it up one notch of preparedness and thought to Anthony Birchak, he gets knocked out.
True. It's true.
Is Yuri Alcantara, where does he sit in the Chris Beal, Anthony Birchak spectrum? Is he at Beal's level already, or is he still a little closer to Birchak?
I just don't trust it. I don't trust Alcantara. I don't trust the way he's fighting. I don't trust him to actually produce enough big moments to win rounds that he's otherwise going to be losing. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. That's why I have a very hard time picking this. I don't really trust Joe Soto either. Like,
I don't trust Joe Soto, but I mean, I know how Joe Soto's going to show up, and I know how he's going to fight. And Alcantara, no idea.
I trust Alcantara's physicality, but not his game. I trust Soto's game, but not his physicality. So that's why it's hard for me.
And I don't trust Alcantara's physicality that much anymore.
Not as much as he used to.
So that combination for me is
fair enough.
Has me picking Soto.
Fair enough. You'll be sorry when me and Iuri show up at your door to pay our respects for this ill-advised pick, Zane.
I'm not going to be sorry, but Alcantara is a slight underdog. Opened at -125, adjusted up to -102. Is currently sitting at -104. Joe Soto opened at -115, adjusted down to -119, and that's where he's still at. So
sounds like Better's had as hard a time picking a winner here as I did.
Yeah. That brings us to a bantamweight bout. Douglas Silva de Andrade, Marlon Vera. This is also kind of a hard fight for me in that I was rewatching that fight against John Lineker. And at least early on, Marlon Vera still looked a whole hell of a lot like Marlon Vera. Still a guy who doesn't do much until he's doing something really big. and who lets himself get backed up without countering and with just kind of defensively covers and gets hit around his defense. But he's tougher, I think, than Douglas Da Silva.
He seems hella durable.
Yeah, incredibly durable. And he picks his shots better. That's really what it is. Silva just doesn't fight at a high enough pace for me to feel like he's going to be able to turn his physical edge into beating Marlon Vera. He tends to fight in these short bursts of big single strikes. And it's kind of like, if he's going to be fighting at the exact same pace as Vera, I just trust Vera to pick the better strikes in each moment. And then if it becomes a grappling battle, Vera has a tendency to pull guard, which is not good for him at all, and work off his back willingly. But he's a much better aggressive grappler than Silva, who just tends to never grapple if he has the choice. He'll work a top game, but to basically just try and hurt you from top or stay standing up and do this very patient one-off power shot striking game.
Mm-hmm.
So it falls a little too much into what Vera does well. I still worry about Vera against any aggressive fighter who can push the pace and push him back. His style is still made to be beaten like that, but there's just not enough of that in Silva de Andrade's game.
Yeah, it's Marlon called Da Silva the generic. Hold on, I have to. Is it gone now? Okay, I have to wait for the echo to disappear.
Yeah.
Marlon, he called Da Silva the generic John Lineker, but in a weird way, Silva de Andrade is also kind of like the alternate universe Marlon Vera. If instead of going to Team Oyama and trying to diversify his game and learn to not put everything into every shot and how to pick his spots, if instead Marlon Vera had invested all of his time in perfecting the let's pick one single power shot out of the air style, his game would have looked a lot more like Da Silva's. Da Silva is like, he's very astute at reading his distance and finding the openings for those single shots. He really struggles because he doesn't put them together, but as far as throwing one shot at a time style fighters go, Da Silva's among the best. He's very good at that. I do think like Marlon Vera has been making steady progression since he joined Team Oyama. I think you can look back at look back at his fight against Davy Grant, where he was still in the midst of, like training with whoever he could train with, working mostly in the gi, basically having no structure whatsoever to his preparation, and then jump to the Ning Guangyo fight. And there is such a stark contrast. It's almost as if Marlon Vera over-adjusted when he took the Guangyo fight and became too cautious rather than being like this reckless, structureless fighter altogether. I think he's been trying to like kind of vacillating between those two extremes, trying to find that perfect balance. But it does look like he's getting closer, and he's getting closer pretty steadily. His big problem is that I think he will always be a slow starter. He's been that way throughout his UFC career. Even in that John Lineker fight, like he did phenomenal in the third round against John Lineker and did pretty terribly in the first round. And likewise against Brad Pickett, he even got beat up in the first round of that fight quite a lot and then knocked Brad out in the third. And likewise against Ning Guangyo, where he was like quite arguably losing the fight and then almost knocked Guangyo out in the third. So we're looking at a battle of range and momentum here. It looks very much to me like a matchup where Da Silva is going to surprise Vera, who is still learning to use his reach, still learning to use that frame, still kind of building a very John Jones-esque game for himself. The long kicks, the straight shots, stepping into the clinch for knees and elbows across open space. That game is still coming together. So I have no doubt that Da Silva is going to crack him quite a few times in the early going of this fight. But as soon as Vera starts reading those attacks, those single shots, and finding counters and pushing forward after Da Silva throws, as he has in his last several fights, I think he's going to have more success doing that than he did against Lineker.
Yeah, and Silva doesn't push. He doesn't push enough of a pace or throw clean enough shots when he throws his single shots for me to really feel like it's going to do enough to make Vera pay for a slow start.
Yeah, if Vera consented to a sort of fencing match where they're just sort of trading single shots and trying to get around each other's defenses, then I think De Silva would have a really good shot at beating him. But as long as Vera...
I think that Vera chooses his strikes better in that case.
Yeah, and he's more effective from a longer range because he's got such a good kicking game. He's really dexterous with his legs. But I really think that would be a much closer fight than what I'm hoping we get, which is Vera slowly picking up the pace and throwing more combinations off of De Silva's single shots. So,
fair enough.
I'm still very invested in Marlon Vera's development. I think he may be turning into a really solid fighter, but it's like treacherous for him against this level of competition until his game really comes together.
He's just not an absurdly good athlete. And so playing this patient, back yourself into the fence, let yourself get hit and try to find just the right openings game and rely on being tough and starting slow. Like, if you're not,
he is pretty athletic, though. I just think he's still
athletic,
discovering.
John
he's still
Jones
discovering
is
his
the best athlete in his division while doing stuff like that. Marlon Vera is not the best athlete in the bantamweight division.
Well, unfortunately for Marlon Vera, he's a bantamweight.
Or bantam.
So if he you said bantamweight. I'm just saying if he had the same exact skill set at light heavyweight, he would look a lot like John Jones. It's just that you need to have a lot more depth and complexity and like quick changes of plan when you're fighting at 135.
Yeah, there are a lot of guys who can fight the fight that John Lineker did against him and which beat him. Yeah. You know, it was a competitive but convincing win.
Yeah, but in fairness, Marlon Vera had John Lineker shook in the third round. I really believe that. Watching it again, like he is able to turn it around and get mean in a way that separates him from many other prospects here. So we'll see how that game comes together.
All right, that brings us to a lightweight bout. Oh no, that brings us to the odds rather. Douglas De Silva is opened at plus 120 and has fallen steadily to plus 104. Marlon Vera opening at minus 160 and rising up to minus 127. So those odds closing over time. I'm a little surprised actually that they're closing. I don't really see a lot of reason to give Douglas de Andrade or Douglas De Silva would get a lot closer. You know, I don't know what would be pushing that, but
I don't mind it being somewhat close. Douglas De Silva,
but it's trending towards even, and like I think Vera's got a pretty clear advantage.
Yeah.
All right, that brings us to a lightweight fight: Alan Patrick versus Damir Hadzovic. And
this is me.
This is you. Yeah.
What a strange matchup. Alan Patrick is like so many times when we try to make predictions, we have to rely on what's happened before. And so we'll look back at like comparable fights on these guys' records. Damir Hadzovic fought somebody who wouldn't stop taking him down in Marcin Held. And now he's fighting somebody who will probably try to do the same thing, but less technically, but maybe more athletically. So Alan Patrick has this weird game where there's just huge spaces between all of his moves. There's not a lot of like subtlety or craft. There's not a lot of starting one thing and then transitioning into another. But he seems to be quite athletic. He can cover distance really quickly. He seems to have some decent power in both hands.
The rare Brazilian that's a good wrestler and a bad grappler.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. But I think he's really a good wrestler largely because of athletic ability.
Yeah.
Like he just hits a nasty shot with great drive. I don't know if there's a ton of there may be more.
He changes angles. Like in his fights against Damian Brown and Stevie Ray, like he got in on doubles and then he would change an angle and like work on the takedown, you know, do more. He shoots from so far out. That's the thing, is that it's hard to like it's hard to look like a good wrestler when you're working from shooting from as far away as he is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, is that he doesn't have any of those little pieces to like inch his way into range, create the suggestion of a threat so he can hit an easy shot. He's got to cover 5 feet to get in on the hips. But he's pretty good at getting the takedowns regardless. So with how easily Damir Hadzovic was taken down and controlled by Marcin Held, I really worry that he's not going to be able to strike with Patrick, but I think he also might be like kind of grimier and stronger than somebody like Stevie Ray, where he's still going to be there in the 3rd round to look for those openings the way he did against Held. Still, I think that despite a considerable layoff for Alon Patrick, I'm probably going to side with him just for those takedowns.
You know, I was this close to agreeing with you and picking Alon Patrick, and then I realized he doesn't. The thing is that he doesn't actually create any offense from his takedown game.
Yeah,
he is very much a lay and pray artist.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's getting valued less and less. I mean, this is going to be a story of how long is Damir Hadzovic upright and how many punches does he land while he's upright?
Mm-hmm.
Because it may not be for very long, and it may not be a lot of chances. But I feel like this could be one of those fights like Frankie Saenz versus Merab Dvalishvili recently, where Dvalishvili clearly won the takedown battle all fight and still lost a decision. And I was glad he lost because he got outstruck and he didn't do any damage or any advance to any positions or get any submissions with his takedowns. It was just takedowns and nothing else. The other interesting part of this would be if Hadzovic was willing to pursue his own takedown game, Alon Patrick's takedown defense is pretty bad. So he could actually like make this a more interesting fight if he was willing to pursue takedowns himself. But I'm going to barely lean Hadzovic just because I think that he's going to land a few good shots each round, and it'll be enough to sway the judges who won't care about Patrick's takedown game too much.
Yeah, maybe. That's not a bad thought at all. Doesn't it seem like unfair the way that athletic ability affect, like Alon Patrick's game is so shallow. He's 4-1 in the UFC. He's like a really good UFC fighter, and it does feel like there is so little to what he actually does well. It's just that whatever he does well, he does so explosively and with such strength that it works.
Yeah, I don't know. Hadzovic is definitely one of those dudes, though, that is also like people are like, oh no, he's this amazing prospect and he's going to come out and do big things. Like he's been fighting for like 10 years or for 8 years now, and he's 30, and he's pretty much the guy he's going to be. And it's this kind of one-note brawler who has very specific, like has good power and good instincts, but has to get caught up in these very particular moments of the fight. Like he's got that same weird thing. Like I say, I'm not sure if this is just an MMA thing or not. I'm beginning to think it really is, of like strikers who aren't comfortable leading or countering. So they only have success when they brawl. And like when they get caught, like when they have to like make a move that puts them in extreme danger to start having success. And Hadzovic feels like another one of those guys.
I think MMA fighters just aren't very patient as a rule. It's like you don't have to throw the shot that gets the guy to counter him in the exchange. You can feint it. You can pretend, you can figure out how he reacts. But again, we did just before this have a discussion about how the limitations of the sport itself, like only having 3 rounds to work, does make it harder to establish those setups.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of it.
I don't know. The weird thing is, like, I'm sure a lot of the striking specific coaches at MMA camps are good like guys who have a past in kickboxing, or boxing, and who have done a lot of work in it. But sometimes it also feels like maybe it's a result of like so many head coaches and coaches in MMA who just have not had very much fight experience at all, and who are like these carryover martial arts instructors who maybe are like teaching some good form, but the actual
don't necessarily understand the subtleties of how it works in a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that may be.
Anyway, odds on that fight. Patrick, let's see, where is this? There we go. Patrick is a pretty sizable favorite. Opened at -215, adjusted up and down to -218, is currently at -226. Damir Hadzovic is the underdog, opening at +165, adjusting up to +180, and currently at +184. I don't know. This feels like a fight. Like I say, it's going to be Alan Patrick getting lots of top control and getting tagged every time it's standing. And so to me, it feels like a close fight. But I can also see why the lines would be the way they are. Just that, like, Alan Patrick is so clearly going to have opportunities as a wrestler.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, I think it is also one of those fights that it feels really competitive, but it's also totally possible it could go drastically one way.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
Patrick could just hit an early takedown every round, do nothing, control, or Hadzovic could hit him with one shot and end it.
Yeah,
like it could. It's a very difficult matchup to predict, but it doesn't feel like it should be that wide because of that.
That brings us to a welterweight fight: Sergio Moraes, Tim Means, and this is okay. We talked about this the other day on Heavy Hands, and I picked Tim Means pretty reasonably. I'm a little less certain of that now. And the big reason is Sergio Moraes' fight with Zach Otto and his willingness to go for single legs and run a trip single leg jiu-jitsu takedown game. And then watching Bilal Muhammad come out and work the exact same thing on Tim Means in that fight and immediately get Tim Means down and on his back. If Moraes can come out and do that and he can get Tim Means on the ground, he is an infinitely better grappler. He's absolutely has the ability to take this fight over and possibly submit Tim Means doing that.
I will say, go on.
I also don't like how specifically weirdly hittable Tim Means still is. For somebody who's striking is still quite sharp and is good at picking things off, and as you say, good at finding momentum and all that. He still tends to just kind of try to shoulder roll away from shots, and it's kind of an effective shoulder roll, and it also is kind of him just getting blasted and relying on his chin half the time.
He's all right at the shoulder roll. By MMA standards, it's like the second best shoulder roll after Bobby Green. So he's okay at it. I can't hate on it too much because I do like that move. Yeah, but you're right. I don't think he's very quick either. It's like his defensive responses just aren't really on quick triggers. Once he gets hit with the same shot a few times, he tends to adjust pretty well and start countering it. But especially early, he does kind of leave himself out there more than you would expect from somebody who looks so fluid when he's throwing.
Yeah. And so Moraes, his ability to wing big shots, his ability to hit a good single leg when he wants to, all of those have me worried about Tim Means. I'm still picking Tim Means just because Sergio Moraes provides too many of the openings that allow Tim Means to build momentum the way he wants. I mean, you can almost, not that Tim Means is anything like Kamaru Usman, but he's a much more fluid striker. And the same, you can feel the same kind of momentum loss in that Usman fight, where Usman is finds an opening for something that works and keeps pressing it, and Sergio Moraes just slowly crumbles until he gets hit and knocked out.
Yeah.
So I got to pick Tim Means for that reason, and because Moraes is so inconsistent about getting to his wrestling game, and his striking, while more effective than you'd think, really is like a snapping front kick and a winging right overhand thrown at inconsistent times. And I think that's just not enough. So I'm picking Tim Means still, but I see more opportunities for Moraes than I did when we were talking about it the other day.
Yeah, Moraes is super crafty too. Like he always manages to surprise you, at least even in the Usman fight. You're like, oh shit, he's hitting Usman here. Like he always manages to surprise you and his opponent with something.
He's got a great sense of timing and range for a guy who's as wild and kind of one note as he often is.
Mm-hmm. This man has drilled that wild overhand right over and over and over. It's the best wild winging, looping overhand right in the game.
It really is.
It's so messy, but he knows how it works. I would say a key difference between this matchup and the Zach Otto fight is that I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure Zach Otto has the shortest arms in the world. The frame of Otto is really different from Means, and how he manages distance. Otto is much more willing to stand right there in the pocket, inch his way forward inexorably. Means uses his reach quite well, so it's going to be a little harder to cover that space and snatch that single leg. But there's also the fact that Moraes there's just too many gaps in Moraes' striking game. It's like you can. So much of what he does, like this is why we harp on about technique, about having nice tight punches and everything. I can say that Moraes' game doesn't look right, but he knows how it works, and that does make him an effective fighter. But there are also many, many openings there for a fighter like Tim Means to exploit. Like it's way too easy to get Sergio Moraes into a position out of which he is not fight effective. To put him in a position where he has to adjust before he can react with a counter or anything like that. Even if it's just letting him throw his own right hand, he has to adjust before he can follow that right hand with another shot. When Usman started to press him, he got him out of position, out of his stance, moving away. He had to reset, and Usman just didn't let him reset. He just hit him while he was wanting to reset. And while Moraes is going to be typically crafty and dangerous, and if he works his wrestling, potentially very dangerous for Tim Means early, I think as the fight goes on, those are just the kind of openings that Means is going to key in on. Another option is possibly that Sergio Moraes just keeps his distance and doesn't let Tim Means fight, and then just kind of wings in a huge bomb or a huge kick now and then.
That has been that's a classic way to get Tim Means to like split decision beat you.
Yeah, but sometimes split decision lose too, though. Like if Moraes can mix in a few of those takedowns with a really boring game plan from long range, that could work as well. He's clever, man. He's been doing this a while, and again, he always manages to surprise. So I can never count Sergio Moraes out, but it does just feel like Means has too many of those nice little quick, subtle moves to slip between the big gaps in Moraes' kickboxing.
Odds on this fight. Moraes is the underdog, opening at plus 180, adjusting down to plus 169, moving up down a bit to plus 171 right now. And Means opening at plus 260, adjusting up to about minus 190, and has moved back down to minus 210. So I like those odds. I think that makes sense. Tim Means is a reasonable favorite.
That works for me. Feels like his fight. It's a fight he could lose, but it feels like his fight to lose.
Exactly. Middleweight bout next: Thiago Santos, Anthony Smith, and let's see. This is you.
Yeah, I still feel like I don't have a good bead on who Anthony Smith is as a fighter.
That's because who he is as a fighter has been changing ever since the Elvis Mutapcic fight.
Yeah, it's kind of like calling one of Marlon Vera's fights like 2 fights ago. Like right after the Guang Yu fight, where you're like, yeah, something's different, but I don't know where it's going necessarily.
The difference being here for Anthony Smith that he's a decade into his career, and
yeah.
Still trying to work out what his own game is.
Right, because he used to be the guy who would throw a ton of shit and look really effective with aggressive Muay Thai early, and then would gas.
Yep.
and get destroyed if he couldn't get the early knockout. Now he's occasionally been the guy who does nothing early or very little, but then has a massive rally in the third round and does a lot of damage. I mean, that does kind of give you an idea of what his limitations are. And it's like really what he's doing is trying to strike the balance between, he's trying to strike this balance between exhausting himself and doing nothing.
Yeah.
It does feel like there are too many holes in that game for Thiago Santos not to exploit them. I think I just really like how Thiago Santos has been developing as a fighter. Like there are still a lot of things I don't like technically about what he does. I still like his boxing is still really kind of mechanical.
He still throws from the hip with his chin up, moving backwards or forwards.
Squares up, chin high, and both hands away from the head, just kind of thrown from the hip, as you said, just kind of winging combinations. But much as was the case for Poliana Viana, like he's comfortable doing that, and it doesn't seem to tire him out. He's obviously a phenomenally good athlete. He's very explosive. He looks very strong. He's very agile for a man his size, like extremely light in his feet. And yeah, like I don't know. I think he's going to create the kind of exchanges where Anthony Smith is not super comfortable opening up. And as long as Thiago Santos can keep a little bit of pressure on Smith, I think he can prevent him from. I think Anthony Smith is going to be caught in this between a mental rock and a mental hard place where he's like, well, is now the time to open up and try to get him off of me? Or do I want to conserve my energy for later? And while he's having that internal monologue, Santos is going to be hitting him, especially with vicious kicks and possibly working him in the clinch in a way that Smith has not experienced with most other opponents as well. So, yeah, I like Thiago Santos. It just feels kind of hard to imagine a sort of a whole game plan that leads to Anthony Smith beating him.
Yeah, the thing I think with Smith is in moments in this fight, he will be picking the better single strikes to throw.
Yeah.
He's shown a good mind of like feinting and leading in and finding just the right uppercut, just the right counter hook, just the right, time to throw one big power shot.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that while he's good at countering, he's really not comfortable being pressured in any way, shape, or form. So somebody will swarm Anthony Smith and he'll throw like one gorgeous counter and then just crumble. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, what? Why? How does that happen? How do you have the presence to like, oh, I'm going to hit this beautiful shot, but if he gets through that, I don't know how to fight anymore. Like, there's a point in his Lombard fight where like he counters Lombard walks through it, and Smith just starts going like this, and he ends up like dropping to the mat, hands over his head, just like waiting and trying to figure out what to do and when to get up and how to get away.
Which that also sounds like the cause for his gassing issues as well, because that clearly is a panicked reaction. Taking his eyes off his opponent, covering up, like falling over, trying to. You don't go fetal as a pro fighter. And if you have the tendency that causes, if you have a compulsion to do that, you're going to exhaust yourself more easily than most.
And it's, he's probably saved mostly by A, Lombard's extreme shortness, and B, Lombard's own realization that he cannot pour out his entire gas tank or he will get brutally finished. And these days just get brutally finished anyway because time has caught up with him. But it's really impossible to see Smith having a moment like that against Thiago Santos and then fighting the rest of the fight, like having something to come back to after that.
But it's not too difficult to see him finding that one first counter and it having a big effect.
Yeah,
like Santos can be caught.
That perfect shot on Thiago Santos, and absolutely, Santos has been knocked out a couple of times. Gegard Mousasi, even Vicente Luque has a KO win over Thiago Santos early.
And won a few fights in which he was dropped early. It was really badly hurt, like by Jack Marshman. Knocked him down,
So he absolutely could get caught by that perfect counter from Anthony Smith. But if I'm picking somebody to fight through the adversity of any given moment, it's got to be Thiago Santos.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all there is to it. I mean, I just think he's going to fill the space early with more strikes. He might get hit hard. But if both guys are going to get hit hard, I think Thiago Santos is going to bounce right back, and Anthony Smith is going to take a while to figure out how to get back into the fight. And in that moment, Thiago Santos will be all over.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think that covers it.
Thiago Santos is the favorite, opening at -230, adjusting down to -294, and currently at -283. Anthony Smith opening at +170, adjusting up to +226, and currently at +230. Seems about right. Maybe it could be closer, honestly. I mean, both guys have power. Both guys have been knocked out before. Both guys are probably going to get the kind of fight they like for a little while.
It does still, for whatever reason, it does feel like Thiago Santos is just a much more consistent. There's not a lot of like predictive data you could derive from Anthony Smith's last two fights.
And it's also clear that honestly, the kind of fight Anthony Smith actually likes is a slow-paced kickboxing match. That's the kind of fight he's trying to adjust to.
Yeah,
and that's not the kind of fight that Thiago Santos fights.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, heavyweight bout: Timothy Johnson, Marcelo Golm. And
remember how we said we knew nothing about Marcelo Golm before his first UFC fight?
Yep.
Remember how he finished it in a minute?
Yep.
Still don't know anything.
Well, this time around, I'm picking Golm.
Yeah.
And I'm doing it basically because Timothy Johnson is kind of turned himself into are you an actual heavyweight prospect of any sort?
Oh, he's definitely not a
prospect. Then you will probably beat Timothy Johnson given the game he has. If you're not, then you won't.
It's clear that's how the UFC is viewing him now, because he just lost to Junior Albini, and now he's fighting what is essentially the next Junior Albini.
Golm is light on his feet. He's got fast hands. He chambers his strikes well and releases quickly. He seems to be able to he seems comfortable throwing lots of strikes. Like, I mean, that's one of the big things to see out of that win he had, as brief as it was, over Christian Colombo, is that he can actually chamber a series of punches while shifting back and forth, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but Tim Johnson can't do it.
Most heavyweights can't.
Yeah. The ability to let go like 20 strikes in 30 seconds is actually, like, there's a natural athleticism and oh Jesus.
Vigor.
Coordination. There we go. Coordination.
I was just going to start suggesting words.
No, don't do that. Coordination to Golm that Johnson doesn't have.
Yeah.
Golm has also shown like he showed the signs of a solid trip jiu-jitsu game. The ability to get the body lock, get the trip, and get a takedown. And honestly, working body lock takedowns is a skill that I wish more heavyweights showed, because it's a lot harder to get your hips low enough and get enough drive on somebody who's 265 pounds to get a traditional double or single leg takedown.
People should be listening to Fedor more. Fedor was all about the clinch takedowns at heavyweight for that exact reason.
Yeah, I mean, you even watch like Stipe Miocic against Francis Ngannou, and you look at, like Miocic got Ngannou down and was able to do good work from top control, but you look at how much trouble he actually had getting classic takedowns completed against Ngannou. Even at a point when Ngannou was totally gassed in the 5th round, he still stuffed a shot from Stipe.
And against somebody more comfortable with their wrestling than Ngannou, you risk ending up underneath a very large man if you shoot on their legs.
Yeah. So seeing Golm going on Christian Colombo, get the body lock and get a trip, that to me says good things, especially for Johnson, who just wants to get the clinch and wall and maul people. And otherwise, Johnson's still a fantastically uncomfortable striker from range, and his whole game is just get the clinch, put you against the fence, and try and either land something huge or just grind you against the cage. And
usually grind is the choice.
And he might catch Golm, he might control Golm, but it's that then is a referendum on Marcelo Golm's ability, because it's a super simple thing to plan for. Like it could be that he's just young and losing this fight won't mean anything and he'll be able to bounce back, but it's not a difficult, it's not a deep veteran test of that crafty Tim Johnson. It's like, can you fight off a big man who's going to try and clinch up with you over and over again?
Disagree slightly, because it is a test of, can you fight a big man for 3 rounds, having never experienced even the 3rd minute of a fight?
That is true. That is a realistically big test.
Right? Because Timothy Johnson, if Golm is not prepared for somebody to survive the first few flurries, all Timothy Johnson has to be is just tough to potentially get a win. It depends on how much Golm might shoot himself in the foot, expecting Johnson to go down like all the previous opponents have. And it's possible that Johnson will go down all the previous opponents have.
In the first round by Albini.
Yeah. And he wasn't out, but he was definitely getting laced with shot after shot. And so I don't know. I do think that it doesn't look to me like Golm has quite the drive or power that Albini has in his hands. He tends to be more of a flurrier. Albini is like a real sniper with the way he sort of sneaks his shot around defenses and just surprises people with a really powerful strike that they don't see coming. That is one thing against Golm, I think, is that Johnson's going to have a slightly easier time telling when he's going to attack. And you noted that Golm is light in his feet. I see a lot of stuff I really like from him with his boxing angles, the way that he uses his footwork in combination with his punches.
But they're not MMA angles. So,
well, yeah, they are not MMA angles.
Tim Johnson has tons of MMA angles.
Yes. And we're going to see the superiority of MMA angles in an MMA fight. But I do think that those angles tend to appear when people are lunging after Golm, which Johnson probably will do, but not necessarily when he's coming forward, the way Albini's nice little short angle changes work, sort of forcing his way around his opponent. I see more of Golm sort of playing Matador. And if Johnson just kind of, I don't know, if Timothy Johnson just absorbs a beating early and grinds him out, there's a very big chance that Golm's just not ready for it. A very big chance.
Could be, yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna deny that, but I just, I think if Timothy Johnson survives a beating early, we just saw him not survive a beating, and I'm not willing to bet on that this time.
The only win Marcelo Golm has that means anything is over Christian Colombo, which
I know
barely means anything. So I don't know. I'm going to go with Timothy Johnson just because I haven't seen Golm actually face a test yet. He has just run over completely.
And Johnson did beat Tybura, which
right. Johnson's Albini is, I think, more powerful and more dangerous in that way against a fighter like Johnson, more capable of just sneaking around that sort of rudimentary defense. I'm not quite sure Golm has the presence of mind for that just yet. And
I'm biting on the hype train. That's all.
Yeah, I like what I see from Golm. I really hope that I'm wrong, especially because he's right in that sweet spot of 235, 240 pounds. He looks like the perfect size to be a nice, just sort of chugging boxer puncher with what seems to be a pretty decent top game in jiu-jitsu. Yep. I think he's like a Nogueira protege, right?
I think so, yeah.
I hope I'm wrong, but I think he may have a rude awakening here against Tim Johnson.
So you're taking Johnson?
Yeah.
All right. I'm taking Golm. I'm on the hype train. I like it.
I support the hype train.
I think the other thing for me is that Johnson doesn't look like he's getting any better.
No, he's not. So he may be getting worse. I don't know.
And that kind of means to me too that hopefully opponents are doing a better job scouting him and, getting less lost by the complete one-noteness of his game.
Mm-hmm.
Golm opened at minus 179, adjusted to up and down to minus 175, and is currently at minus 165. Johnson opened at plus 150 and is down at plus 139 at this point.
I'm not against the hype train, Zane. I'm waving my handkerchief as it passes by, but I think Timothy Johnson is going to drive his garbage truck into the side of it and derail that shit.
Oh, this is going to be like that time well, no. So the question then is this like a garbage truck derailing a train, or is this like the time that Jumbo got killed getting loaded onto a train, Jumbo the elephant, and got hit by another one in passing, destroyed?
Yeah, it could be. Oh, it could be. You know what? I was being topical there. I was referencing the GOP congressional train that got hit by a truck. This is totally off topic, but I was seeing people who were like, it's a false flag because there's evidence to support that the truck hit the train rather than the train hitting the truck. So, and I just want to tell all those people, this is an alarming statistic, I know, but a full 25% of vehicle on train collisions happen when the vehicle hits the train rather than the other way around. So it's not a setup. But I think Tim Johnson is going to be driving that vehicle, all right?
Okay. He might die on impact, but he'll take the train off the rails, damn it.
That's right.
All right. That brings us to a lightweight bout. Michel Prazeres, Des Green. And this is you.
Man. Not a super easy one to call. I come into it just sort of feeling like I prefer Prazeres. I feel like he's the more... I don't know. There was a lot of stuff to like about Des Green's first UFC fight. The fight with Josh Emmett, he looked super composed and relaxed, and he just didn't seem like physical enough against Rustam Khabilov. And
okay, I could say I warned you, but
you did, did, yeah. He just didn't look physical enough, and so the question is like, can Michel Prazeres replicate a similar approach? And I think he can. Like Prazeres has been quietly getting better. He, as one of the T-Bow light fighters, along with like Francisco Trinaldo, the Brazilian grinders, he has been quietly getting better and becoming more and more comfortable
the biggest thing is that he's really figured out pace and shot selection so that he doesn't gas himself out and that he lands effectively when he throws.
Right. He really looks like an experienced fighter at this point. He's reaping the benefits of all that experience he has, where he's better at marshaling his resources, knowing when he can afford to step in with it. And so it has the effect of making him look like, as a guy who used to gas, making him look a lot more aggressive. Where you could almost, I would forgive you for watching his fights and being like, man, his stamina got better. But really, I think it's just that he's gotten better at managing it.
Yeah.
And spacing those salvos out, getting more time on top and control positions, and then otherwise managing his distance and letting his wind come back, resetting and recovering when he's not engaged in an exchange. So it's made him like a really effective fighter down the stretch where he remains dangerous in late rounds. His top control is still smothering and awful to deal with, and I think that's getting better too. I think he's investing more in controlling positions before he attacks than he used to earlier in his MMA career, and so he doesn't lose those positions like he so often did in his first few UFC fights, like instantly going for a submission and allowing the scramble. And I just don't know if there's quite enough structure to Des Green's game to deny that. Like if Prazeres were to sit at range, Green could absolutely pick him off. And I think Green could probably out-wrestle him if he were to get that kind of fight as well. But if he's being pressed back, by the combinations of Prazeres and the nice kicks that Prazeres uses to cut off the cage. If he's being forced into these prolonged wrestling exchanges, he's going to have to deal with Prazeres' strength, which was what seemed like a really big problem in the Khabilov fight, as it so often is for Khabilov opponents. So, yeah, I kind of think Prazeres is just like Khabilov light here, and he's going to kind of do the same thing.
It is hard for me to reckon with the idea that Michel Prazeres has beaten Mairbek Taisumov.
Right.
I have to say. Like, that's like the weird one. The Gilbert Burns, like, that's a tough one too, but I get that. I understand how that works. Burns is still an inexperienced striker who's not good off at whose striking game falls apart with certain kinds of pressure. But I think honestly that Prazeres is he's gonna be like he's right in the middle of the continuum of which Rustam Khabilov might be on one end and Josh Emmett would be on the other.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have these physical, capable, pressuring fighters, one of which who really just wants to box all at one speed and stay on you, and the other one who is going to give space and then wants to wrestle in like a high-pressure wrestling. I think that Prazeres being a split of those is just a little too far on the Emmett side of things, though. My biggest worry is that, frankly, he's going to spend too much time striking with Des Green. Because the problem, I think, for me more with Des Green against Rustam Khabilov is that Green cedes space. He gives up space. And for Khabilov, like giving up space and being like, okay, I'll let you have the range you want and the time you want, is just a death sentence. It's just like, oh, okay, well, you just take my hips whenever you want them, and then I'll have to fight you off from there. You can't fight you can't fight Rustam Khabilov that way.
Yeah.
Prazeres is not quite, like, his game doesn't work that way. He is much more like, okay, I'm going to, wade in, jump into the pocket with a couple of big hooks, and then try and, like, lean my way out of it, throwing hooks backwards so you don't chase me.
Mm-hmm.
And when he does that, he tends to get hit pretty hard if the fighter he's facing is a reasonable counterpuncher. Mads Burnell certainly cracked him that way. And I'm sure other fighters did too. But it's
even JC Cottrell caught him with hooks in those exchanges sometimes.
Yeah, even his head is online, it's up, and he's just kind of like, his shot selection and his power are enough to scare a lot of people off from that. It was enough for Gilbert Burns to get him to not try and counter effectively.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's enough for Des Green. Green, like, that was the thing in the Emmett fight, is that Emmett was out pressing and trying to throw these, like, one-speed power shots, and Green was more than willing to just stay in the pocket and counter him and pick him off with the better combinations afterward. And then, Rustam Khabilov was able to out-wrestle Green, but it wasn't like he had a really easy time out-wrestling Green. He had to work really hard on it.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that Prazeres can push a technical enough game through wrestling to make up for getting hit harder in counter exchanges. And that the way he has to force those exchanges, it's too much like the way Emmett had to fight Green, of constantly trying to close him down, and Green moving backwards and being willing to look for the counter and fight defensively in ways that take advantage of some of the more predictable parts of Prazeres' game. And because that's the thing, is that you try and play the, like, oh, I'm going to counter your predictability game against Khabilov, and Khabilov is just unpredictable enough out at range and is willing to use the space you give him in crafty ways to set up these takedowns, to set up these big overhands and these spin kicks and things like that Prazeres can't do. So yeah. I got to take Green here.
I think my issue is really that, like, I don't think Green, like, a big difficulty for him as a striker is that he doesn't make enough happen.
No, yeah. It'll be a continual impediment to him again as he tries to move up the division.
He can peck away at those openings, but then he doesn't seize the openings created by the pecks that often. And so even the Josh Emmett fight, where Emmett, I think we know good fighters, experienced fighters have an easy time of getting a read on him after the first round. He tends to become quite predictable, and he also tends to tire out. But even then, I'm looking at Fight Metric right now, the third round of their fight, Emmett landed 14 and Green landed 17. Green's shots were cleaner and crisper, but he wasn't really pressing the issue even as he was getting more effective as the fight went on. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Odds on this. Des Green is the underdog at the moment. Opened at plus 135, adjusted down to plus 113, and currently at plus 121. And Prazeres, the favorite, opening at minus 175, adjusting up to about minus 147, and currently at minus 145. Not surprised that Prazeres is the favorite, and I do like how good he's been at finding ways to win lately. At just especially at creating submissions now out of his top control and locking that down, at finding ways at his better strike selection and his better power management. I think it falls too much into the better parts of how Des Green's game functions. Maybe not, though. I mean, Andre Harrison beat Des Green with a pretty simple power control game. So
yeah,
it's tough. Green can definitely be suckered into slow-paced fights that he loses.
Yeah.
All right, that brings us to a women's flyweight bout. Valentina Shevchenko, Priscila Cachoeira, and if Shevchenko does not do work on Priscila Cachoeira, it is a damning indictment of Shevchenko's ability to work with clear opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all this is. Cachoeira likes to sit flat-footed in front of people, bite down, and wing wild hooks at people until they go away. That's the heart of her game, is just being the tougher person in the fight who is willing to throw power and be tough. And that's enough to win, especially if you're a reasonable athlete and powerful. The lower levels of women's MMA, being the person who will actually sit and take damage and hit hard is good enough. But I mean, it should just be easy for Shevchenko to do work countering and getting trip takedowns from the clinch and clinch knees and working top ground and pound game and all the other things that Shevchenko does well. And if she's not getting to that, then that is really only, like I said, it's just an indictment of her ability to be a massively tentative fighter at times.
Yeah. Cachoeira, we talked about the sort of wild openness of Poliana Viana's striking game. It's like that, but kind of without all of the confidence in how it works.
It's that, but pressing forward instead of countering, and without any of the other structure. Viana's game, there are reasons beyond discomfort with leading that she steps backwards because she wants you to chase her into the clinch, and then where she can jump on a submission attempt, pull you to the ground, and start chaining submissions.
It is key that those wild combos come on the counter when you have given her an opening.
Yeah. And
not as your one way of leading is to just start throwing those combos and marching forward behind them. She's got to be fairly tough, Cachoeira, because she has fought some opponents with some experience, and she still knocks them all out, more or less. She's got to have some durability. She's definitely going to go after Shevchenko unless she takes a completely different tack for her UFC debut, which sometimes happens. But realistically, if she looks the way she has, as long as Shevchenko can keep a cool head under truly reckless pressure, then she's going to have a feast of opportunities before her for counter punches. It just seems like it would be crazy if Shevchenko did not just ding shots, ding right hooks off of Cachoeira's chin every single time she came in.
You know what I actually would bet?
Hmm.
Bet Shevchenko wins this by rear naked choke.
Hmm.
I bet that Cachoeira comes in winging wild. Like, I can see this fight. Cachoeira comes in winging wild hooks, stepping forward. Shevchenko does what she often tends to do when people pressure her, which is not actually counter with really brilliant technique like you'd expect, but just jumps into the clinch.
Yeah.
Hits a trip takedown, and Cachoeira immediately gets her back and sinks in a rear naked choke. Like, I would bet that's what
that seems likely. Those nice tie dumps in the clinch, those nice takedowns that Shevchenko can hit. Seems really comfortable with her submission grappling. It is kind of weird to me, since we don't have much to say about the matchup, I'll just say quickly, it is kind of weird to me that so many people now have like come out saying Shevchenko's undeniably the most technical striker in women's MMA, and I don't know about that. She's got good technique on like the 3 strikes she throws, but she doesn't put combinations together, and she doesn't really like feint or like double up on one side and then go to the other. Like she's still quite limited. She may have a nice looking right hook, but she's still quite limited in how it works. So
I think until further notice, Joanna Jędrzejczyk is still the most technical striker in women's MMA in terms of a complete back and forth, well put together combination game.
Shevchenko's definitely got Joanna's number defensively.
Yeah.
She's a better defensive striker, so maybe that's what people are coming from, that she moves her head pretty well. But other than that, yeah, I think you might be right. One counter right hook, rush the clinch, trip takedown, rear naked choke. Sounds like a very, very feasible outcome.
Yep. Shevchenko is a overwhelming favorite, opened at minus 705 out to minus 917. Cachoeira opened at plus 435, is now plus 593. I'm fine with that. There's no reason to bet on Cachoeira here. If nothing else, Shevchenko is at least incredibly tough and durable. So the best options Cachoeira even has to win are not likely to happen.
No.
That brings us to a bantamweight bout: John Dodson, Pedro Munhoz.
So we also talked about this one fairly extensively on Heavy Hands this week. And I did have my interest was piqued by a comment that our friend Phil McKenzie left for that Heavy Hands episode, because we all basically came down pretty solidly on the side of John Dodson.
Yep.
On the surface, this looks like a pretty bad style matchup for Pedro Munhoz, because he's not particularly fast, and he knows that his only way of making the fight he needs to win happen is to come forward. And so he's just kind of inexorably moving forward. Poor defense, not a great sense of distance management, or at least he doesn't really care about distance management nearly as much as he cares about keeping the pressure on. So he just walks into shots over and over and over and tries to respond with counters. But he is a very, very good leg kicker. And that was the point that Phil raised, that John Dodson may in fact be awful at dealing with kicks. He's never dealt with them particularly well, and that did seem to be his main issue in the Marlon Moraes fight. In a fight that was otherwise very close, Moraes basically won because of his kicks. Those were the shots that he landed most consistently, that Dodson didn't really seem to know how to deal with. He responded, as Phil pointed out, he responded to them with the counter left hand, the typical MMA response, step through with the cross when they try to kick your lead leg, except that Dodson does often have an issue of like getting himself to respond, of making that response happen, especially if it doesn't work a couple times. And he is in this sort of long-range fencer's mode. I don't know. I still tend to think that Munhoz is just not thoughtful enough in how he applies his striking to kind of keep his distance while pressing that tactic. So the problem is that even if he's landing leg kicks, I still think he's going to be marching in after them with punches and getting hit as he does that. It's going to be like a mix of the Moraes fight and the Lineker fight, but enough of the Lineker fight that Dodson's going to land the way he did on Lineker. So I still like John Dodson. I still think it's overall a good style matchup. But if Munhoz kicks the shit out of his legs and mixes between that at long range and pressing forward specifically to wrestle, he could make something happen.
Yeah, I mean, my specific concern with that would just be that Munhoz is just not as fast as Marlon Moraes.
Very true.
So without that speed, the ability to catch Dodson with those kicks is just
very true.
Going to be a lot more difficult.
He's got a nice technical kicks. He sets them up well, but if Dodson can just leap out of range before the kick lands, then maybe that's all for nothing.
The other thing is, too, that Munhoz is honestly pretty bad at countering. Like, countering is not something he does well. Usually what he does,
counters in that he throws back when you hit him.
Well, what he does most often when you start throwing at him is that he goes like this.
Oh, sure.
And he eats a couple shots. And then, like, if he's throwing at it's sort of the thing where, like, if he's throwing at the same time you're throwing, he will walk through your shot to land his own shot. Yeah. But if you're just if you're leading on him openly in space, he will mostly just shell and try and survive it and eat shots. And
depends what kind of fight he's creating. If he's constantly coming forward, then he can counter just by eating a shot. Okay, now I know I'm in range. Start throwing.
Exactly.
But if it's more of an open space fight, double forearm guard.
And John Dodson, like, if with Dodson's speed, it's almost always going to have to probably be an open space fight where he's having to react to Dodson coming in on him, where he's just going to throw up a high guard and hope that whatever's coming at him doesn't hit him too clean.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to favor Dodson for all that. I mean,
and Dodson can also feel comfortable knowing that he has some of the best takedown defense Munhoz will have ever faced.
Yep. And Munhoz, like, he struggled with Damien Stasiak.
He went to war with Damien Stasiak. Granted, Stasiak has become significantly better than we ever expected him to be, but still, he's got a very clear limit, I think, on how far he could go with his style.
A lot of what happened in that fight with Stasiak is purely down to Stasiak could counter and Munhoz couldn't. So Munhoz would walk Stasiak down and get countered by a big hook, and then when Stasiak led, Munhoz would just shell up and let Stasiak hit him. Munhoz still threw more, so he won, but that's really like what it came down to, is that he threw more, so he won.
Yeah. And he is insanely tough, though, Pedro Munhoz. Like,
he is.
Because he also, like, in the third round of that fight, kind of similar to the Rob Font fight he just had, he really hurt Stasiak in the third round because his pace didn't change at all, despite having his face torn up, nose bloody, absorbing tons of damage, and fighting at a really fast pace. He did not slow down.
Yep. He didn't slow down even much when he fought Jimmy Rivera and just got, like, whomped on for 3 rounds.
No, he had a really good third round. He started to get he got destroyed in the first round, and Rivera started to fade, and it was like, oh shit, he's still doing the exact same stuff. Munhoz is dangerous.
He is.
He's definitely not fast, and John Dodson is definitely extremely fast. So
Dodson is the favorite. Minus 165, adjusted up and down to minus 147 or so. Currently at minus 150. Munhoz opening at plus 125, adjusting up and down to plus 125 or so, and it's currently at plus 125. I'm a little surprised that's as narrow as it is. I think Dodson's path to victory here is pretty clear, and it would be a pretty reasonable upset victory if Munhoz were to win this.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of working a lot off of Munhoz being... Like, that's a lot of what's going on there is Munhoz being on a pretty good hot streak of 4 straight wins, and Dodson coming off of a loss that was a close loss. And you have to remember, he got kicked in the balls so hard early in that fight, he was dry heaving in the ring in that loss to Marlon Moraes, and then got eye poked immediately afterward.
And still only lost a split. He was still in that fight all the way.
And still was in that fight all the way.
Similar to the fight with Lineker. Yeah, it's Dodson has been losing more. He's lose win, whatever in his last 6 or 7 fights, but the losses have been to a substantially higher level of opposition than even the people like the people who have beat John Dodson are so much better than the people Pedro Munhoz has been beating.
And when Dodson is winning, Eddie Wineland, Manny Gamburian, like I can't remember the Makovsky fight. That might have actually been a slightly interesting fight, if I remember correctly.
That fight was awful.
Was it awful? Okay.
It was. I mean, it was kind of interesting tactically, but it was really bad to watch.
Okay. What I mean, like, in terms of Makovsky getting anything done, but, like, he styled on Eddie Wineland. Like, that fight would not, like, the fights he's generally winning are not close at all when Dodson's winning.
The Makovsky fight was the same type of thing. It was just that it was one of those really frustrating nights from Dodson where he clearly has the edge and doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I can't remember it off the top of my head. Anyway,
he's gotten better with that since the Lineker fight, for sure.
But for Munhoz, all of his recent wins have all been like, well, you were losing for a while, and then you started winning. Dodson, when he's winning, it's usually just like you just clearly won every part of that fight.
Yeah, and when he loses, it's neck and neck all the way, unless it's Demetrius Johnson.
That brings us now to our main event, a middleweight bout, Lyoto Machida, Eryk Anders, and believe, is this me? Let's see, you. Yeah, this is me.
We both just have to count through.
All right. I am less sold on Eryk Anders winning than I was a couple days ago. The big thing is, I don't see anything specific in the way Eryk Anders fights that tells me he beats a veteran fighter. Like, he may be doing things right enough that he beats dudes that he's beaten, that he gets, beats Rafael Natal, who is just, Natal, and beats Marcus Perez. But, like, his actual structure to a lot of his striking, it's pretty not there.
He clearly has great feel.
Yeah.
And very limited experience. Like, that's what it looks like.
And I think the bigger thing that has me worried is that his clinch game is honestly pretty bad. Like, he looks like a good athlete in the clinch, but in a lot of extended exchanges with Perez, he just, like, he tied up, went for something, either locked down Perez and did nothing, or went for something extremely predictable that Perez would slide away from, and then they reset. Like, very rarely was he actually able to load up and land a good power shot from the clinch. That most of his clinch game seems like tied towards getting to a not very good wrestling game. A not very technical wrestling game. So, like, that gives me a lot of pause about him beating Machida. If he's going to try and just wing wild, predictable shots into the clinch, and then he's not going to do work from the clinch, then Machida has a lot better chance of just, like, shoving him out, getting out back, moving back to range, resetting, and starting this process all over again. Probably the only reason I'm still picking Anders, and I really don't want to do this, and it's like a terrible reason, it feels like, is it the way Machida counters, the way he sets up his left hand, has always put him in danger. Always. It is always jump in with your whole body and your head up, and then try to move your head out offline after the punch is landed to get back out of the way.
Yep. Creating collisions is a very effective way to generate surprising power. When you add somebody else's momentum to the momentum of your shot, very dangerous, but that works both ways. That's why same time counters are the most dangerous, because you are moving into the strike with your own.
Yep. And when he was, when he was in his athletic prime, he made that work. He got out of the way. He was able to skirt danger time and time again. And it led to some brilliant knockouts with some great performances. He is not any longer that fighter. And what we saw in the Derek Brunson fight was him doing that same thing and then just getting tagged with a wild shot on the end of it, trying to jump in.
Yeah.
And Anders probably has the hand speed to do that. He may not have the technique. He may not have the clarity of, well-rounded style, but he does have hand speed, and he's got power on the end of that speed. And that's like this could easily be like 3 rounds of the slowest paced, like Machida out at range, just trying to stay outside, landing kicks, trying to just keep Anders away from him, and Anders chasing and not having any footwork to cut off the cage and not getting him into the clinch, or getting him to the clinch, and Machida separating and moving back out to range, and that's it. But even at that point, does Machida win the fight off that? Maybe, but I'm not gonna bet on it. So I'm gonna go with Eryk Anders, but I can easily see Machida like just staying way outside, having this ugly, like, I land a couple knees in the clinch when you clinch up with me, and that push away, get back out, and circle away and circle away and circle away, and land a few leg kicks and circle away, and like taking a decision off that.
Yeah.
But that, I feel like, would have to be the kind of fight he would have to fight to win. And I'm not going to bet on it, so I'll take Anders, but
yeah, it's the degradation of Machida's physical ability combined with what feels like a kind of outmoded game at this point, an outmoded style of striking, versus like the probably severely underdeveloped game of a younger and much better athlete than Eryk Anders. It is. Yeah, I will say, like, I do like a lot of the technical aspects of Anders' game, such as they are. Reminder, he debuted in 2015.
Yeah, he's raw.
He's extremely raw, and for being as young as he is in his career, I like the fact that he seems to take mostly small steps.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't like lunge around the way you would expect a really good athlete to want to do. He's not Alain Patrick. He kind of shuffles and moves slowly. That could absolutely put him in the kind of fight where he just gets kicked, like classic Lyoto Machida, like Machida versus Tito Ortiz. Just peck away with the kick, make them sluggishly chase you, and don't ever let them engage. But there's a reason that, like, when kickboxing was first becoming a big thing in the 80s, it was people who combined karate kicking with boxing, because you need boxing to be able to fight effectively in the pocket. Nobody else has figured out how to throw hands in the pocket as well as boxers. That's just the truth. And Lyoto Machida's game is pure karate, the way his striking works. He added in those Muay Thai elements under Rafael Cordero. I think he's back under Cordero, so we may still see more of that, but really the core of his game, what he's spent his whole career doing, is just waiting for you to overcommit recklessly and creating that one big collision. And I think more and more we're seeing less of that out of even young fighters, because they are being taught to engage in the striking battle differently now than they were 15 years ago, where fighters who are coming up in this environment are edging their way into range, are flashing the jab, and are themselves looking to counter when the other guy tries to cover that distance. So I just think, like, Anders, even with the bare bones of a modern MMA striking game, is going to at least be ready to swing some big shots when Machida comes in on him, even if he's losing the rounds getting kicked. Up to that point, it really comes down to me not trusting Machida's physical well-being anymore. I don't feel like I have any faith in his chin to stand up to that power repeatedly. And I don't think I have faith in his stamina to be able to maintain technical proficiency over the course of a 5-round fight. Whereas, like, Eryk Anders has actually won a 5-round fight. And despite fighting at a crazy pace against Marcus Perez, it didn't really slow down that much. In fact, more signs of somebody like fighting beyond their level of experience. He took his foot off the gas a bit when it was clear that he wasn't going to get Perez out of there. He still has
did well to beat Gegard Mousasi in a 5-round fight. It's not like he's never won one.
No, but that feels like ages ago now for Machida.
I know.
That's all it is.
That was 3
I would
years.
never.
3 years and change ago now.
Yeah.
No, 4 years ago now.
Yeah, that was back in February of 2014. So yeah, 4 years, a full 4 years ago. Back then, I would never ever question Machida's ability to go 5 rounds. The Machida who couldn't keep up with like Luke Rockhold and Yoel Romero, I have questions about that. And especially considering like how much more fragile he has looked. Like Machida has always been sort of a front runner in that when he gets shaken up, the only time he's ever like overcome serious adversity was the Chris Weidman fight. That's the only time where he really rallied to punish somebody who started to have serious success against him. And that was because Weidman was dead tired, and I just don't see an older Machida doing that any better than a younger Machida did against an opponent who will probably be more capable over the 5-round distance of continuing to deliver power shots. So I like Anders. I'm a big fan of Machida. It's possible that I'm exaggerating his vulnerabilities because I'm a big fan of his, and so I'm quite worried about what might happen to him. I don't like seeing him lose the way he did to Derek Brunson and Yoel Romero, or Luke Rockhold for that matter. But I see the slide continuing for him.
Yeah, there's no reason that Eryk Anders couldn't get KO'd by a big counter left hand.
No,
frankly, he's never faced anyone who actually had any of the technical proficiency to hit him clean in his career.
Best striker he ever fought was Rafael Natal, who breaks down under pressure.
Yeah.
So
it absolutely could happen, but seeing Machida, land the counters on Derek Brunson and it just not do anything and then get knocked out, it's hard to, like Derek Brunson is not a much more technical fighter than Eryk Anders.
No.
He's a more experienced one, but that's about it.
Yeah, and as long as Anders in experience doesn't get the better of him, as long as he doesn't panic or come out looking drastically differently than he did in previous fights, like Ngannou style, then I do like the fact that he's got this nice subtle way of inching his way into range. I think it's quite likely that instead of lunging after Machida, he sort of inches after him and counters the counter. And hopefully better than Rashad Evans was able to when he famously made the attempt.
Anders opened at -300, adjusted up and down to -267, and is currently at -286. Lyoto Machida opened at +220, adjusted up and down to +229, is currently at +231. I want to feel like that's wide, but I think everybody's kind of feeling the same way about Lyoto Machida right now. So
yeah, I mean, you could justifiably say that's way too wide because we have seen so much great stuff out of Machida. I just don't have faith that he can still do that kind of stuff, or that even if he can, that he's not just going to get touched on the chin at some point and badly hurt. So
yeah, that'll be a bit sad. But at least if it happens, it'll come at the expense of a guy who looks like he might have some developing to do into something interesting at middleweight.
Yeah,
at least it won't be him like getting, I don't know, murked by Brad Tavares or something, where I'd just be like, well,
why did this happen?
Still Brad Tavares.
If Machida looks like he's on the precipice of no longer being a relevant fighter, it makes absolutely perfect sense to match him up with like a younger, very athletic prospect like Eryk Anders.
It's better than watching him lose to Derek Brunson, where I'm like, yeah, okay, great. Derek Brunson still goes out and gets knocked out instantly by Cachoeira.
Derek Brunson's just always going to be Derek Brunson. Eryk Anders, we don't know what he might become yet, so that alone makes it more interesting.
All right. On that note, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like. That's a thumbs up thing down there. That helps us a ton. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM. And that's where you get all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, news, analysis, stuff, all the stuff we do week in, week out. I'll be back for the 6th round after UFC Belem this week. And then we will be back for UFC 221 next week with Vivisection, care, don't care, if I did it, heavy hands, all our normal stuff. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.